It's just afternoon Central Time, which means it's my privilege to welcome you to today's Alumni Career Webinar, Time Design, Not Your Old School Time Management by Alicia Bassuk. My name is Maggie Marathi, and I'm the Assistant Director for Career Programs here at the Alumni Association. Our office is committed to helping provide alumni with the resources they need to stay competitive in an ever-changing job market and support the alumni community with career resources, networking channels, and job search capabilities. It's my privilege to introduce you to our presenter today, UChicago alumna Alicia Bassuk. Alicia is a 1995 graduate of the Booth School of Business and is currently principal at Ubica Leadership Strategies. She is an executive coach and strategic advisor to leaders and their teams internationally. She provides clients guidance in maximizing individual effectiveness and optimizing team cohesion. Her clients have nicknamed her a business shrink, muse, and drill sergeant. Clients include Presidential Appointees, Barclays, McKinsey Company, Christie, Google, Vosges Chocolates, the United Nations, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and MIT Media Lab. She is a contributor to the Harvard Business Review blog and has co-authored articles with such leadership gurus as Marshall Goldsmith, including Finding Meaning in the Workplace in the journal Leadership Excellence, and has published on CNN.com. She has an upcoming book including essays about leadership and management techniques. Alicia splits her time between Chicago, New York, and Buenos Aires. Today's webinar will outline best practices for designing the layout of your day with creativity. You will learn new techniques to stay focused, keep your energy level high, handle your inbox, and work more cohesively with your team. Alicia will also address the questions that many of you submitted via our registration page ahead of time. Now, let me get to the reason we're all here today, and welcome, Alicia.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm going to talk a little bit about a bunch of techniques that are hopefully like really quick ways that you guys can integrate new practices, get some shifting in the way you manage your time, and then Maggie and I will have a conversation about some of the questions that you guys sent in. So my name is Alicia Judith Bassuk. My name is pronounced that way because my parents are from Buenos Aires. They immigrated to the United States in 1968, and they didn't know anybody in this country. They were both at the very top of their class academically, and that was one of the strongest values that they clung to as immigrants, is this idea of being a top student. And so I wanted to be the top of my class as well, but unlike my parents, studying did not come easily to me. And I had to figure out how I was going to compete to be at the top of my class. And so from a very young age, I started formulating techniques to help myself with time management. And it turns out that they help others as well. And so the seeds of what came when I was a kid trying to compete as a student have grown into these techniques that I've shared throughout a 20-year-plus career. So the first I'm going to talk to you about some general concepts, and then we'll get more specific. So the first is about, do you really want to change? Do you really want to grow? So you have to ask yourself. And so there's an equation for growth that you can jot down and then spend some time considering. So the growth equation on one side is the fear of growth. And on the other side of the equation is a vision for how you want to grow, an action plan of how you're going to get there, and then discipline. So I want to break that down a little bit. So when the fear of growth is greater than all the things on the other side, that means you're not going to grow. So the idea is for all the other sides to be bigger than the fear, and then you have some momentum towards growth. So the vision of growth is getting really specific. So in what way do you want things to be different in your life? The more specific you can get, the better. So there can be lots of growth equations around one topic because you want to get really specific. The action plan, you want to do it in what I call bite-sized chunks. So it's not about the ultimate action plan. It's about breaking it up into one step that you can achieve, and once that is mastered, you would add the next step into the action plan. And discipline is a combination of two things. It's holding yourself accountable on a daily basis to that bite-sized action plan. And the second part is not being distracted. So the typical things that might distract someone from being disciplined are smaller, less important tasks. But it also could be things like watching the news, and even things like computer games, and even I was in a YPO group, and someone brought up that the thing that distracts him the most is online porn. So we got to just be really honest with ourselves, like what is it that's distracting us, and put it on there, so that we can be open about it, honest, and avoid those distractions. The second, so when that equation is right, you'll see growth, and you want to stay really interactive with that equation and keep updating it to keep yourself growing. The second concept I want to introduce is the idea of taking the high road at all times. So when we're taking the high road, the front part of our brain, the executive thinking of our brain, is more activated. When we're not taking the high road, when we're triggered, it's the reptilian part of our brain that takes over. And so the studies have shown that we can actually will ourselves, we can tell ourselves that we want to stay with that higher executive thinking overpowering the reptilian part of our brains. And so you want to do that because then you remain curious and open and learning and collaborative, and you feel good. So there are a lot of techniques about how to take the high road, and I encourage you to spend time with those. But one thing to help you motivate is, and that I learned very early on, is that when you don't take the high road, it's not just that you're closed and you're not feeling as good. It's that it's a total energy drain, and it ends up leading to more problems. So your choice to allow yourself to get triggered is also a choice that's leading towards energy drain and more problems. So as much effort as it might take you to become more enlightened, to take that high road, that time is a worthwhile investment to avoid all the drain that will come from having more problems by being triggered. The third category is choosing curiosity, always choosing curiosity. So the more the stress rises, the more people are presenting differing opinions, the more stretched thin you are, the more I encourage you to choose to take a curious approach, to notice the details, to wonder about things. Because when we do this, even something that appears stressful and ordinary can open up new parts of that thing that energize you, lead to deeper learning, help you become more engaged, and this allows you to take a totally different approach and work in a much smarter way. So the final general concept I want to introduce is that you want to do things on your terms. This is super important. You know your strengths, and you know in what ways you can get the best out of yourself. Other people don't necessarily know that about you. So that if you can do things on your terms, that's where you're gonna really get this whole concept of working smart. So on your terms, at first glance, it can appear to be, it sounds selfish and self-serving, but actually, if one of your terms is that you want to do things that benefit the people you are working with or working for, then it is no longer selfish or self-serving, because one of your terms is that you want everybody to benefit. So I want to leave you with those ideas just in the background. Think about them, play with them, consider them, reflect upon them, because these will apply to a lot of aspects of everyday life, and they are the background of these techniques I'm going to talk about with you. So the first technique is around how to prioritize tasks. So I started doing this work right at the beginning of when people started using the internet. And so I saw how people's work lives changed firsthand. And so the pace that we do things and the amount of opportunity coming our way at all times is nothing like it was 25 years ago. So what do we do with this? I observed a lot of time management tools over the years, and I basically took my favorite parts of all the different time management tools and I combined them into something very simple. And it's tried and true. My clients have been using this for 15 years, and it helps everybody. So I'm going to ask everyone it's really best if you actually use paper and pen rather than do this online. So if possible, grab a piece of paper, full size as possible. And what you want to do is create one line across the center vertically and one across the center horizontally. And I'm going to explain to you how this matrix works, and then I'll break it down a little bit more about how you'll actually use it, and I'll define the terms. So in the top right quadrant, you want to label it high priority, high urgency. So high priority is referring to how central it is to your professional success, and high urgency is referring to time. So it has to get done in the next few days. In the quadrant, the lower right quadrant, you're going to label it low priority, high urgency. In the top left, the label is high priority, low urgency. And the bottom left is low priority, low urgency. So the way this works is that our brains, there's scientific studies that show that our brains, if we don't have everything down on some sort of a list, we somehow end up reminding ourselves every 7 seconds about important tasks. So that's just an unnecessary drain. So we're going to put everything in one place. And in the top right, that's going to be your most active category. These are things that are central to your success, and the deadlines are in the next few days. So as I'm talking, you can jot down what kinds of projects those are. So these are specific projects with deadlines in the next few days. And what you'll find is most likely this is going to be jam-packed. There's a lot of deadlines in the next few days for important projects. So then you're going to take a look, and the things that absolutely have to be done before anything else can get done, they have greater urgency than everything else. Those, and it's usually only up to 3 is what I recommend. You're going to circle those. Those things have to get done before anything else. And if there's something that requires special attention, even beyond the urgency of those things that are circled, you're going to put stars next to those. There's no way you can miss it. That absolutely is going to get the attention before anything else. The lower right category has things that are not central to professional success, but they'll be quite a headache if you don't get them done in the next few days. So these are things like RSVPing to an event that you've been asked to speak at, or signing a check for taxes. It's returning emails to someone on the board. So it's not central to your success, but it's going to lead to other problems if you don't just get it done. And the way this right-hand category works is that At the beginning of each day, you're going to glance through, and it could be throughout the day as well. And the only time that you do anything on the bottom right is when you absolutely don't have enough time or focus to do anything on the top right. So if there's any window where you can get any piece of anything done on the top right, you're going to go for it. But if you're in a taxi and it's loud and you only have 2 minutes, but in those 2 minutes you can put your signature on something, you can respond to a quick email, you can make that phone call back, that's when you're going to get to that bottom right part of the list. The top left matrix, quadrant, is big projects that are strategically very important for you professionally. So we're looking at, rebranding, revising job descriptions, reorg. These are big projects that are looming. They're not due in the next few days, but you do want to start thinking about them. You do want to start putting the pieces in place. The way this works is that when it's time to start handling those that are in the upper left quadrant, they break up into smaller tasks and they move to the top right quadrant. The bottom left quadrant is everything else. It's things that if it never gets done, it will not impact you professionally. So it's picking stuff up at the cleaners. It's reading a management book that a friend recommended. It's calling someone back who you saw at a cocktail party. So this priority matrix is constantly evolving. You're crossing things out, you're adding things in, you're rewriting it. And this is the basis for getting your priorities straight each day. The next piece of that is making sure that your direct reports have their priorities aligned to yours, and this tool will help you make sure that that's happening as well. So there's nothing that should be in their top right category that doesn't completely support what is in your top right category. And same thing for your senior managers. So the person you report to, yours should match theirs as well. The next technique I'm going to share with you is around delegating. So when you have that priority matrix all set, go through it one by one and ask yourself, am I uniquely positioned to do this work? It's going to seem at first glance that the answer is yes to all of it, but I encourage you to push yourself, because typically about a quarter of the things on that list you are not uniquely positioned to do, which means there's someone else at the organization that can do it. Usually what I hear is, well, but the time it would take to teach that person will take longer. I'd rather just do it myself. I encourage you to go ahead and do the teaching, because the next time that kind of task hits your list, you won't need to teach that person again. So it's a worthwhile investment to go ahead and delegate, even if it requires some training. So I always tell my clients, you only want to spend your time doing work that you are uniquely positioned to do. And I realize some people don't have anyone to delegate to. So unfortunately on this call I can't get to every single detail, but if you try to stick to these rules of thumb, this is going to help 80% of you. So the second part of delegation is that once you've delegated something and people come back to you with questions about it, the best thing you can do is whatever they've asked you, ask them, what do you recommend? What do you suggest we do? What ideas have you come up with around this? What you're doing there is you are empowering them. After you ask them a few times, what do you recommend? They won't keep coming back to you with asking you what to do. They'll actually come to you with recommendations. And the third part of this is that you have to actually be able to trust people that you're delegating to. And that's tricky. So what you want to do is figure out if you trust them and why you trust them or don't trust them. And so there's a trust equation that you can jot down and take some time to reflect upon. So first I want to just define trust, and then I want to go into the trust equation. So trust is the confidence that the other person will not exploit your vulnerabilities. Trust is the confidence that the other person will not exploit your vulnerabilities. So when we look at the trust equation, and this is from an excellent book called The Trusted Advisor, McKinsey, I think, has the absolute best training for their consultants, and they've been using this book for a long time. And so I like to talk about the trust equation that's in that book. I've changed it a little bit because I think it works a little bit better for how my client base talks about things. The trust equation is credibility, and I'll talk about what these words mean. Credibility plus reliability plus relatability, all over, so like divided by, self-orientation. And so what that means is that when you delegate to someone, you can trust them if they are credible, which means they have a reputation of having expertise. They know their stuff. They're reliable means they'll come through with the deliverable meeting the deadline. And this is one where a lot of people have problems with trust. The third one is relatability. And just so you know, the way the original author of The Trusted Equation, he called it intimacy, which I think is just kind of a not very useful way to look at it. Relatability is really captures his meaning, which is, do people connect with you? Do they like to work with you? Are you easy to work with? So someone can have all those qualities, but if their self-orientation is very high, meaning they're out for their own win, you're still not going to trust them. You're going to be able to trust someone who you are aware cares about your win as well. And so the closest you can get that to zero, the most trustworthy people will perceive you to be, and that you will in fact be. So in terms of the, I'll address the reliability part, what happens when you're working with someone who doesn't actually meet deadlines and do the quality of work. And so we'll get there when we talk about accountability. So, and actually I'll jump to accountability now. And so the way to hold people accountable, you want to create what is a culture of accountability. And so the way to do this is to be very clear about what your expectations are that they will be delivering, including a very specific deadline. So that in itself sort of happens with some frequency. But I'm going to take it up a notch and say, put that in writing. Because what you do when you put it in writing is that, you know, some people think that it's going to be like micromanaging when they do that, but actually people, your colleagues, your direct reports can really relax into that, because it means that they can open it up and review what your expectations are to make sure that they're totally nailing it. And what it also does for you is if you put that deadline on your calendar and say, Jane will be getting me XYZ deliverable by Friday at 2. You put that on there. When it pops up, if if Jane's deliverable is not in your inbox, you immediately go to that same email chain and you say, Jane, per our email chain above, you were going to have this to me Friday by 2. Please get it to me in the next hour. And now there's no question about accountability. And ideally, Jane becomes more accountable and starts actually holding herself accountable. But also, if it doesn't work out, now you have a really strong paper trail to present to HR and say, look, we've been working on this. I've been very clear about the deliverables. There's no question. What you'll find is that if you are consistent with this, your direct reports, your colleagues will start actually stepping up and taking the initiative to get those emails to you, and they'll increasingly meet their deadlines with high quality work. So leading meetings, you want to create meetings that are more productive, and you want to have less time in meetings. So a couple quick techniques to use for that. What you want to do is shift the meetings from being update meetings to working meetings. And the easiest way to do this is, if you have weekly meetings with your team, ask your team by Monday mornings at 10 a.m. to send you weekly updates. It's just quick bullet points. Here's what I'm working on. And here's any questions I have for you as my manager. That way you have all the updates, and you can use the actual meeting time to struggle with the hard questions that you actually need that face time for. The productivity of your meetings will really jump if you do just that one thing. The second thing you can do is what I call over-preparing. So if you take even a few minutes or longer, if you have it, to prepare for the topics that you're expecting to come up in the meeting, again, the productivity of the meetings will jump. If there's a way you can influence others to do the same and over-prepare, that's a huge win. And the last thing is cut down the meeting times. So it's true that often the best thinking happens in the last 10 minutes of a meeting, but that's true even if the meeting is shorter. It's just something about how we're set up to push through right at the end of a meeting. So hour-long meetings, you want to cut them down to 45 minutes. 45 minutes, you want to cut them down to half hour. Half hour, 20 minutes. 20 minutes, 15 minutes, etc. And just see how it goes. And I guess I'll make a general note. You know, with my clients, I view growth as a series of experiments. So all the stuff that I'm talking about, they're experiments that are worth trying. When you see the results, you'll decide if you want to scrap them, if you want to build on them, if you want to tweak them. But what's definite is it's worth a try. It's worth an experiment to see what happens when you cut down the meetings, what happens when you delegate in this other way, what happens when you prioritize your time. So you're not committing to a new way of doing things. You're committing to trying and then being reflective and looking at the results and measuring, is this improving my time management? Is this improving my my productivity and my leadership effectiveness? So a few more topics, and then we'll get to your questions. So in terms of fostering team cohesion among your direct reports, my role model on this has always been Phil Jackson when he was coaching the Bulls. And there's just so much amazing learning from how he turned what was one incredibly, like, the best player in the history of the game and a team into being a championship-winning team. And he did it again when he went to the Lakers. So the first thing is you want to really understand who the players are. And so ask yourself, with your direct reports, do you have all A players? Because, you know, I'm not sure Phil Jackson could have done what he did if he didn't have all A players. But he did. He did, and they weren't working well as a team. But first things first, is everybody an A player? If they're not an A player, can you get them there through your coaching style of management? And if you've already tried, if you can't get them there, is there a role that they're better suited for at your organization or elsewhere? And a good rule of thumb for that is if they told you that they were resigning to take another job elsewhere, would you fight to keep them? If the answer is anything other than yes, then that's the signal to you that it's time for them to move on. The second piece in fostering team cohesion is you want the team to get to know how to work together even in stressful times, especially in stressful times. And the best way to do that is to encourage them to engage in healthy debate with one another. And that requires a lot of transparency, a lot of goodwill, a lot of support of one another. And so you have to lay the groundwork for that. But unless that is your goal, then you won't even be laying the groundwork. You'll just have patterns of dysfunction that repeat themselves and play out even more strongly in times of stress. And the last piece is to create a culture like Phil Jackson did, in which the players, in which your team is supporting each other, especially in their weaknesses, to know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and so appreciate the strengths that in the times that someone is showing their weaknesses, the person who has the strength steps in and takes over, and either teaches that person how to develop that weakness into a strength, or just takes over for them and does the task that comes more easily to them. All with goodwill, not with resentment. So the last piece of the cohesive team is having a culture that is very comfortable and even welcomes giving and receiving feedback continuously. The trick with giving and receiving feedback and it leading to positive interactions are a couple things. The first is you want your feedback to be fact-based. And a fact is something that you can capture on film. It happened. A person said something. A person did a certain action. It's not an opinion. It's not an interpretation. So stick to the facts and realize that any of the interpretation part is just that. It's just not as valuable to focus the conversation around the interpretation. And then talk about the topic in a way that you realize the person giving the feedback is assuming they are a trusted member of the team, they are giving the feedback with the hope that it's going to improve their work life, your work life, the process for the team. And so what you can do is say to yourself, okay, you think that I should do things in this other way. You told me with your feedback, you think I should do this thing this way. And I believe that you're telling me that because ultimately it is best for you. And that doesn't mean it's not best for me too, but for sure it's best for you if I make the change that you just recommended. And that is enough. That I value you enough that you telling me that that would be better for you is enough for me to go ahead and make that change. I can do that for you. I can do you a solid that way. You're not going to actually say all those words, but that's the frame of mind that will help you be more receptive to the feedback. And the last quick technique, just to try to drop a whole bunch of these so that at least one thing is useful and will improve the way you're handling your work life, is the inbox. So super quick on the inbox. Most people have heard of the one-touch rule. You look at something, you either delete it, you forward it, you archive it, but here's the thing. If you are forwarding it or you're archiving it, you want to make sure that it either goes on your priority matrix, something that has to get done at some point, or it goes onto your calendar as an appointment with yourself to get something done. And be very specific about it. Here's a couple things that are important to do for this to work. One is make sure you label things in the right wording so that you know that if you archive it, when you search, you can find it again easily. And the second is I want you guys to try, again, it's just an experiment, get your inbox to 0. So there's nothing in there, and everything is a to-do either on your matrix or on your calendar. And just keep doing that consistently. Unless you're like some superhero with email, the inbox is still going to grow and grow and grow. So pick one day each month. I recommend you doing it either on a flight or while you're watching a football game or a sitcom or something that is somewhat distracting, and handle all the buildup that got into your inbox. Just go through it, chug through it. It could take hours, but it's just something that once a month you'll just do that cleanup, and that'll keep you ahead of the inbox problem. So I'm going to now open this up to Maggie, and we're going to have a conversation about some of the questions that you guys sent in. And Maggie, if people have sent in questions as I've been talking, I'm very interested in those questions as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much for those tips, Alicia. I think we can jump right in here with some of these questions that we received ahead of time, and also with a few that have come in. So the first one I'd like to address is actually just a really quick one. We have somebody asking if you could repeat the name of the book about trusting others, just for his reference.
Yep, it's called The Trusted Advisor.
The Trusted Advisor. Okay, great.
Yep, and it's by Meister, M-A-I-S-T-E-R.
Great. So we'll make sure that that fits in the recording as well. So I'd like to ask a couple of questions now about the priority matrix. We've had a few people ask if you have any tips or recommended apps that they can use to maybe form their priority matrix electronically, or to keep track of it, right away with their inbox.
So a lot of people have asked me to build an app that does this, because there isn't anything that does this exactly. So you can definitely create this same matrix digitally, and that's, I wanted you to just do it with paper and pen to start, because it helps, there's just something about that process that helps you capture it better. But you can definitely move that to digital. And then there's a way to do this so that you actually, once you get comfortable with it, what I do with my clients is I migrate it to your calendar. So you skip the matrix altogether, because you can actually sort of create a matrix on your calendar. So what you would do, and I do not recommend that you skip the first step, because if you're not totally, if you haven't integrated how to separate out those categories, you'll get very confused putting it straight on your calendar. But ultimately, the top right pieces that have the circles or stars are going to go first thing in the morning. You're actually going to create a little list on each day of those things that have the circles and stars that absolutely have to get done before you do anything else. And then the rest of the stuff in that top right category will, you'll actually assign it a time in the day when you want to try to get it done. And just to stick with that top right category for a second, anything that doesn't actually get done when that time has passed, it gets moved to a new time slot. So you're recommitting to when you're going to get the thing done. And you know when it absolutely has to get done, that deadline cannot move, and that's when you just handle it. So in this thing of migrating it to your calendar, the bottom right, you pick, so generally people aren't using their work calendars on a Sunday, and so you actually can create a list on Sunday if your week view is Sunday to Saturday, for example. If not, you would adjust this accordingly. And you would just list those things out. And so that's where I was telling you, you'll glance at the bottom only when you don't have time to do anything in that other category. When you find you have 2 minutes, you glance at that list. Okay, what can I kick off that list? And it's just sitting there all the way to the left of your screen, presumably, if you have this one format. Anyway, so it goes like this. I won't get into all the details. I really discourage anyone from jumping to that, but that is where you'll head with it once you've mastered, once you've really integrated this way of separating things out in your head.
That's great. Thank you. And just to follow up on that, so when things come into your inbox and they require your attention, you either forward or archive based on the one-touch rule. Obviously, those tasks are going to make it onto your priority matrix as they come up. But otherwise, do you have suggestions for the best time to sit down and think about the priority matrix? Is it at the end of your day when you're thinking about planning out tomorrow? Is it first thing when you get into the office? Or is it even a third time that you would recommend?
Yeah, so definitely first thing in the morning, you're going to review it. And then last thing of the day, you're going to sort of rewrite it. You're going to reset yourself for the next day. And then it's great to just scan it through the day when you find yourself in a position of, okay, what do I need to get done? What do I need to get done first? That's when you have whatever that inner dialogue is with yourself, that's a good time to check in with the matrix. And I want to add one more thing about what apps can I use? If we look at the data set of my clients, nobody has found an app that is super useful. So it's still an opportunity in the market out there if anyone wants to take it. But there's nothing that I can say, this is what my clients use and it's helpful. They use this very simple matrix is what they use. And people have tried all the stuff that's out there. It's just doesn't work the way our brains work is the problem.
That makes sense, definitely. And one more question about the priority matrix. So you were speaking about the upper right-hand corner, the high priority, high urgency. And when you were speaking about high priority, you said that these are tasks that are really important to our professional success and that they should align with the upper right quadrant of our direct reports and also of our supervisors. Do you have any tips for ensuring that those tasks really do align on both sides with our supervisors and our direct reports?
Like with every category that I talked about, there's so much more to say about all of these things. So there's like a whole conversation about this. But the super quick on it is what you want to do is you want to ask your senior manager, what are your strategic priorities? And there should be no more than 4, no less than 3. That's generally where you want to be. And they might come at you with 10. They might come at you with 1. But ideally, it's 3 or 4 strategic priorities. Your strategic priorities align with those. So there's nothing that you're spending your time on that isn't directly supporting the strategic priorities, and not necessarily all of them, but the ones that apply to you of your senior manager. Same thing with your direct reports. So the way that's the first conversation that precedes use of this matrix. Once you have this matrix, you bring your direct reports for the weekly meeting or for your one-on-ones, and you actually run through, okay, what's in your quadrant? And you'll see that there's stuff on there that definitely does not support any of your strategic priorities. And that allows you to have a very clear way to drive that conversation. And they'll start asking themselves that question: does this align to any of my senior managers' priorities?
Great, thanks.
And another, well,
yeah.
I'll add one more helpful thing. There's so much I'd love to talk about with each of these, but another really useful thing is when you're meeting with your direct reports or with your senior manager, ask them to label what percentage of time they're using with each thing, because you may, what it does is exposes their flaws in time management. They may be using just a ton of time on something that you just don't think is that important, but you would have never known just from looking at the tasks listed or hearing the updates. Same thing with your senior manager. Let them know I'm using 80% of my time on business development. I'm using 80 whatever, and have a very open conversation. Does that seem like the right way to divide my time? This anchors the conversation in facts, and it's so helpful. It really it helps you get underneath a lot about time management and your perceptions of it, your senior manager's perceptions of it. You'll be surprised at how much interesting information flows out of that.
That's great. And I have a couple of questions that have come in that relate to that and are related primarily to managing up. So let's say, for example, you don't have any direct reports, but you're part of a team that you think could work a little bit more cohesively, or you'd like to implement some of the ideas you mentioned earlier about shortening meetings and making them more productive. How should you go about trying to get your manager or leadership's buy-in on some of these strategies? Is it, presenting the high priority, low priority matrix to them, or do you have any other tips for approaching that conversation?
Yeah, so two things. One is pick one thing at a time that you'd like the group to try, and let them know, hey, I was part of this conversation. I was part of a webinar, and I learned this, and I read this book, and I would like to, would everyone like to try this technique? I think it's worth a try. And so this is, again, about bite-sized chunks. Just bring one thing up, remind them at the next time. You'll have to lead the effort, check in about it, ask people for feedback, make comments about it. So you have to keep it, in an ongoing dialogue. And then once the group has mastered or integrated that thing, then you can, again, invite them to participate in another one. The second piece there is role modeling. So a lot of times, if it's not appropriate to ask the group if they want to try something new, just by you role modeling it, other people will pick up on it, or they'll ask you about it, or they'll fall into place doing the same thing. One example of this is if you would like to delegate to people, but there isn't really a spirit of delegation, and it wouldn't be appropriate to bring this up as an worthwhile experiment for the group. You might, as someone is talking about one of their deliverables, you might actually offer to help them with a piece of it that is it would need to actually fall into a category that makes sense for you too, but you'll surprise them by saying, oh, would it be helpful if I did this and that, added detail to this report that you're going to be using? And if that catches on, what you'll have is a group of people who are offering support to one another. So it's the inverse of delegating. It's not that you're asking people, will you do this for me? It's that there's this new way of engaging among the team where they are thinking to themselves, wow, that was really nice when he offered to do this piece for me. Is there a way I can reciprocate that? And that, again, just shifts the culture of the team.
I think that's great advice. To shift gears a little bit and move away from the team cohesiveness strategies, we've gotten a few questions from either entrepreneurs or individuals who work primarily from home. And oftentimes they have submitted these questions saying that they get overwhelmed by their high priority, high urgency tasks. Can the priority matrix still work for them? Do you have any tips for how they can adjust it if they're feeling overwhelmed by their high priority, high urgency tasks?
Yeah, so if you're feeling overwhelmed, and again, this is there's so much to this conversation, but just a few general rules of thumb about this. One is that you want to ask yourself, like, is there an 80-20 rule? So, like, really are all of these fires, or are some, they can actually wait? Because time is your best friend. If something doesn't have to be handled, if you let it wait, if really it's okay to let it wait, then oftentimes it will get resolved without you even making any effort. So that's one question, is that really, like, get honest with yourself. Are these really high urgency issues? If they are, going through and saying, is there anyone, so maybe you don't have anyone you can delegate to. Are there, consultants? Is there a temp agency? So is there anyone in the world that you could delegate this to? If the answer is no, you want to ask yourself, is there any piece of this that I'm just, like, accepting that I'm supposed to be in a frenzied state, that I've just sort of given myself permission to be in a frenzied state for prolonged amounts of time? Because often I see that, and when I bring that to my clients' attention, they realize, wow, I was just, it's sort of like a persona. That was, that's how people are at my company. We're all running around stretched too thin, but really, I can relax about that. The next piece is, am I really working as smart as possible? So maybe, for example, I'm just telling you things that I commonly see with clients. Maybe you're being a perfectionist, and so that report that you spent 4 hours editing, like, another person would have edited it for an hour, and it would have been very, very good and good enough given all the other pressure you have. But yes, it wouldn't have been as perfect, but given the other deadlines you had, it would have made sense to just let it go at very good instead of perfect. So you want to catch yourself with those sort of inefficiencies. And then, at a certain point, you want to ask yourself, like, I remember Ira Glass, the guy who is the host of and creator of This American Life. Remember, he was being interviewed, I think, on Fresh Air once, and he said, it used to be that people would talk about, like, buying new furniture and like watching some TV show and all these domestic things, like walking their dog, and he was like, who has time for that? I have no idea how these people are living their lives. There's so much to do at work. And then as he got older, he said, wow, and I love just going home and kicking my feet up and watching a good TV show, and I want to redecorate my place so that it's more comfortable, and I love walking my dog. Like, when did all this happen? And so you have to ask yourself, like, really, what do I value in my life? And am I willing to totally change the way I do things to be able to live that way? And by the way, it might mean that you have to change your role, change your job, change your income. Again, there's like a whole conversation behind this, but my job is to help get movement in these areas, to help set up experiments so that you can keep learning about yourself and lead to, windows of opportunity for growth in ways that, surprise you, maybe terrify you, maybe delight you.
That's great. So we did have a lot of questions that came in related to that about work-life balance strategies. When you're talking with your clients or encouraging them to find a little bit better balance in their work versus home life, do you recommend that they try to use the priority matrix in their home life as well? How do you integrate their tasks?
Yeah, so all your tasks should be on here, not just work tasks. This is everything in your life on the matrix. Thank you for clarifying that, Maggie. And so you see everything that needs to be done. The work-life balance is like a much deeper question. So it's a couple things. one is a stage of life thing. There's a certain point that you hit in your career, and only you know if you've hit it, where your wisdom, it hits a tipping point. You like cross a threshold where your wisdom can be used to come up with innovative ideas, to inspire people, to come up with solutions, to bring positive things to a team, to a project. And if you continue to put in the same amount of hours and use that wisdom, now you're out of balance. What you want to do is, as the wisdom grows, you're able to pull back on the amount of time that you're using. And so again, longer conversation there, but ask yourself, reflect on that, go for a walk and really think about that. Talk to your friends about that. Not everyone is stuck in this. Some people are, and some people aren't. Some people have figured it out. And I can tell you that my client base does not struggle with this, because I won't continue to be retained by someone whose home life is suffering in these kind of extreme ways. The clients that I have are extremely busy. They have huge deadlines, a lot of pressure. But if they have found a way to still go to the gym, go to the theater, be with their families, relax, if they can do it, that means everybody can do it, because nobody has more pressure, like maybe like the heads of military or something. I haven't worked with them yet, but there's a way to do it, and you have to demand it of yourself, and you have to start experimenting. So I'll give you some little experiments that you can do to just give it a try. So the first thing is, again, ask yourself, what stage of life am I in? Do I have wisdom that I can throw at this stuff so I can grab some of my time back for the rest of life? Because, God, the rest of life is so important. You want to give that some airtime. So so some other things you can try are pick one day a week that you can stop working at 5. I recommend that be a Friday. Just one day a week. And once that gets integrated into your calendar, I want you to start chipping in to it even further. So for example, pick one day a month that you can work at home, if that is allowed at your organization. At most it is by now. Once that's integrated, maybe you can, this is up to you. You can pick another day that you can leave by 6:30. You can pick another day a month that you can work half a day. Whatever it is, just gradually, again, in bite-sized chunks, just add a little bit more of the rest of your life to your day, just a little bit at a time. You will find, as with all my clients, that you are more productive at work when your home life and your leisure time is more fulfilled. And I'll leave you with one last thought, and then Maggie, however you want to wrap up. I always tell, at the end of every retreat, I always remind people, be kind to each other, be kind to yourselves, and practice all of these things. Practice anything, all the experiments, one step at a time, and reflect on it. And thank you all for your time.
Well, thank you, Alicia. I think this has definitely taught me a few things, and we really appreciate you sharing these strategies with us. So again, many thanks to everybody for joining us for today's presentation, and once more a special thank you to Alicia for this presentation. As a reminder, please do watch your email for a link to the recording of today's webinar along with a follow-up survey. And we'd also like to invite you to join us online at careers.uchicagoalumni.org, where you will find information about upcoming events, our webinar archive, our alumni jobs board, and a form to let us know when you've hired another UChicago graduate at your organization. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next Alumni Career Webinar.